Hello, hello. Welcome back. Lesson 178 is where we are here in the workbook. So let's jump right into this today. I often turn on the camera and the microphone here with the idea that it's going to take me 30 seconds to say what I need to say, to convey what I need to convey. And sometimes that is absolutely not the case. In fact, it's usually not the case. And I find myself talking for several minutes about an idea. And the very first idea that we're going to cover in this review period today is one of those ideas where one could say a single sentence about it, or one could go on for over an hour. No, I won't go on for over an hour. However, there's more to it than a simple sentence. So I'll start with the summary version, and then we'll elaborate on that. Again, as always, in this particular review period, we start with some contemplation, some active contemplation of the idea that God is but love, and therefore so am I. And as always, sit with that one as long as you can and must. Let it just become you. Yeah. God is but love, and therefore so am I. Okay. So the particular review lessons today are lessons 165 and 166. Now, lesson 165 is the one I'm referring to that can be summed up real quickly and then elaborated on. And that is, let not my mind deny the thought of God. Let not my mind deny the thought of God. The thought of God is our brothers, our sisters, others, ourselves. There is no other. Us, all of us. Let not my mind deny the thought of God. How do we deny the thought of God? Well, we deny that we're one with God. We conveniently forget and run off into this thing that we call the world, this spinning orb of rock that we call the earth, living in these and completely artificial things called modern nation states that are simply an idea. It's a conglomeration. I mean, unless you live in a place like the United Kingdom or Australia or an island country with pretty clear geographical boundaries, it's a nation state is a group of men, almost always, right, that lived hundreds or maybe even thousands of years before we did in this current timeline, and drew a bunch of lines on a map and said, here, we'll defend it like dogs. About that. When we identify with the ego, we divide and we subdivide. Each nation is divided into further territories, provinces, states. Every state or province is divided into smaller districts or smaller jurisdictions. We might call them counties. And every county is subdivided in even further and further and further and further. It's one division after another, one distinction after another. Reality is not like that. There is no separation of any kind. This is why this is such a radical presentation of universal spirituality. Jesus just comes right out and says it. And you know what's really cool about it? We're ready for that. You are ready for that. How ready? Well, I don't know. You may be as always, experiencing resistance to the ideas in the workbook. Because the ego does not want us to be one with someone whom we say we despise. That might be a tough one to accept, a tough one to swallow. No? You're not expected to leap to that conclusion all at once. This is why spirituality is a process. This is why the workbook proceeds over a period of 365 days minimally. Because most of us need a gradual awakening. Now, the Course says in several places that for us to experience that blinding flash of enlightenment would overpower many of us. In other words, most of us aren't ready for that, but we could be. We will be in the end. This is what time is for. So in this case, it makes perfect sense to say it's only a matter of time, because it is, and that's what time is for. In eternity, truth as it really is, or if you're following Eastern philosophy, absolute truth, ultimate truth, as opposed to relative, which is the world and our world of perception. Things that are true, or apparently true in time, aren't the case in eternity. Each of us is the thought of God, the thought of God. Not individual thoughts of God, the thought, singular, of God. Let us not deny, okay? Let not my mind deny the thought of God. And as we practice sitting with this idea, we return after we've sat with this idea, let not my mind deny the thought of God. We then return to the common thread here, which is God is but love, and therefore so am I. This one always makes me smile. It's such a powerful statement of truth. And today we have a very fun lesson 166, you'll recall. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. I am entrusted with the gifts of God. So what, you might ask, are the gifts of God? Well, it's not a brand new Mercedes necessarily. If you've got one, that's cool. You can come, I'll give you my address and you can come pick me up and we can go for a ride. All right. I don't expect anyone to take me up on that, but it's fun to say, isn't it? So the gifts of God aren't necessarily these material things that people seek after and want to sate their desires with, like a new car, a new house, new this, new that, new hot, sexy lover, juicy that turns us on 24/7. Maybe a new boat, a hotter bod, washboard abs, right? The gifts of God are beyond all of that. They may include some of these material things, but that's not the point. It's not the point. The gifts of God are love with a capital L, forgiveness, kindness, generosity, limitlessness, joy, compassion, happiness, true, constant happiness. We are entrusted with the gifts of God. Why? We are the thought of God. We are the extension of God. We are the will of God. You are the will of God. If you've not contemplated that before, contemplate that right now as part of this really bountiful idea. Each of us is entrusted with the gifts of God. So in practice, we sit with this for as long as we'd like, and then we return to, again, the central theme that runs throughout all of these 10 review lessons here in the workbook, and that is God is but love, and therefore so am I. So as we practice, let's not lose sight of this central idea, which runs throughout the review. God is but love, and therefore so am I. All of this makes what I call the verbal math easier. It does. We discover, I'm laughing because as we discover as students, we need repetition, don't we? We need to hear things dozens of different times. If you've ever been an adult educator, I mean, I've done trainings. I was a university professor for 8 years, things like that. I mean, you've had likely a number of you experiences like this where you actually were held out and held yourself out as a teacher. But, as teachers, we're always learning. There's so much truth and wisdom to the statement that no one ever learns as much as the teacher, or more than the teacher. Sometimes the teacher learns probably more than the student. I can think of many instances where that felt like the case for me. And where we are with this is we need to hear things dozens of times as adult learners, as we forget. I mean, we've all got a cell phone and a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed. And even if you're not on social media, there's always email for you. Yeah, this recording's taking place in October of 2021. There's always email for you. Don't know when in the future you're watching this, but welcome. And we have distractions all the time. Therefore, we need to review things. We do. We need to hear things more than once. We need to see things. We need to touch things, especially if we're kinesthetic learners, right? We need to touch things like physical copies of A Course in Miracles. Look, I've used this book so much, the Miracles label is worn off. Isn't that funny? It says A Course in. Well, and then you can barely here in the light make out miracles. So some of us need to touch things like a pen and paper. Maybe you're a note taker. Maybe you prefer auditory learning. We need to hear things in dozens of different ways. Therefore, if you've ever been an adult educator, you've been taught and instructed to give instruction in multiple different formats. If you've ever run a class or a group, there's some lecture from the professor that will resonate with some people, some small group activity that will resonate with other people, individual activities, pair activities, movies, right? There's all kinds of different ways to present the same material over and over again. And as spiritual teachers, well, this is what we do. So it's worth investing the time and the thought and the energy into the central idea for all of these review ideas, and that is that God is but love, and therefore so am I. So I thank you, as always, for your journey, your commitment to A Course in Miracles, and your learning. And you will produce fabulous change and loving transformation here in the world with your study and practice of this course, however that ends up looking for you. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that. And thank you for joining me. And we will see you again next time.